I remember the warlord as clearly as if it were yesterday, tall, proud, and indomitable. He was a Zavathian among our species, a symbol of strength and brilliance. You think the warrior caste is composed of mere brutes, creatures who value bulk and ferocity over all else? You're wrong. The warlord was the best of us. Larger, yes, but faster, sharper, and endlessly cunning. He was more than muscle. He was the mind that never lost a battle. Not one. He earned his place in the war against the Bazagar, rising from regimental command to division, and finally, after the blood-soaked triumph at the Battle of Bazagar, he ascended to the rank of warlord. It was his finest hour, our finest hour. And yet, for all his brilliance, for all his victories, he didn't deserve what happened to him. I've heard the accusations. He's been blamed for everything, made into the scapegoat of our failures, but I will not apologize for defending him. He was a leader who understood the game of war long before any of us. He saw the threats we refused to acknowledge, but instead of being heeded, he was cast aside, even by his own warrior caste. The war with the humans began long before the first shot was fired. I was there at his side, as his aide and senior adjunct, watching the political tensions build, the diplomatic threads fray. My role was to manage the things he didn't need to be burdened with: tactical logistics, intelligence, the endless stream of reports from the scholar caste. The warlord's focus was always on the warriors. His was a mind consumed by unit preparedness, combat readiness, morale, and supply. We had long agreed that only through the Union, our great civilization, could we move forward, and it was our duty as warriors to act when called. When the talks with the humans collapsed, I was the one who delivered the news to him. The scholar caste had failed in their negotiations. The humans had rejected our demands. War was inevitable. The warlord took the news as he took everything, silently, his expression unreadable, his mind already calculating the next step. We had studied the humans from afar, of course. We knew they had a long tradition of war, but they were small, half the size of even the weakest warrior caste, and their technology was no match for ours. Their forces on the planet, Wasilla, were minimal, a few scattered regiments at best. But the warlord wasn't content with a simple victory. No, he understood that what was needed was not just a win, but a message. War is a language, he often said, and violence is its purest form of communication. He saw the humans for what they were, warriors in their own right, and knew they would understand the message delivered through overwhelming force. This is why he insisted on deploying the entire army of Bunder Twilight to Wasilla, 6 divisions of infantry, 2 war machine battalions, and a cohort of Zavathians. It wasn't about necessity. It was about scale, about showing the humans the magnitude of our power in the opening moments of the war. The warlord's strategy was clear. We would land, strike hard, and claim an overwhelming victory at Angel Station, the humans' military base on the 4th continent. From there, the army would split into 3 thrusts, spreading the humans thin, forcing them into desperate defenses across multiple fronts. It was simple, and yet, in its simplicity, it was genius. The humans would see our numbers, our strength, and they would understand. They would know that resistance was futile, that their fate was sealed. I remember standing with him on the eve of our deployment, the cold wind of Wasilla whipping across the landing zones. He was silent, watching as the massive transports unloaded the divisions onto the barren surface. Even in that moment, with the weight of an entire army at his command, he seemed unmoved, his mind distant. He was thinking ahead, as always. The opening moves were swift. Scar leader Fanzora, a seasoned commander with over a dozen years of service, led the vanguard. His division, the Rising Waters, 7,000 of our finest warriors, mounted on transports, surged across the border. It was supposed to be a straightforward advance, overwhelm the human defenses and break through to Angel Station. But nothing is ever so simple. The first explosion shattered the stillness. Fanzora reported back mines. The human forces had littered the land behind the demilitarized zone with countless mines, a brutal, unexpected defense. Our engineers were brought forward to clear a path, But as soon as they began, human air units swooped down, strafing our forces with unrelenting precision. Our own air squadrons engaged, but the humans had something we hadn't anticipated: speed. Their flyers were smaller, more agile, moving in ways our pilots couldn't match. It became clear very quickly that we had underestimated them. The warlord didn't flinch. Without hesitation, he ordered Scar Leader Prandev's anti-air units into the fray. His plan was to attack the human aircraft from both the ground and the air, and for a time, it worked. The human flyers, for all their skill, couldn't evade us forever. We brought many down, forcing them to withdraw, but the cost was steep. Our air wing had been decimated, a third of our flyers gone, many more grounded for repairs. Yet, even as we pushed forward, even as we cleared the minefields and began to surge towards Angel Station, the warlord sensed something was wrong. The humans were not retreating. They were not breaking, as we expected. Instead, they were speaking to us, responding to our violence with their own, and the warlord, ever the listener, was beginning to understand the message. Angel Station loomed on the horizon, a seemingly insignificant cluster of steel and stone against the backdrop of Wassala's endless, barren plains. It was unimpressive by our standards. No towering fortresses or intricate defenses, just a handful of prefabricated structures surrounded by sparse sentry towers. And yet, it was here that the human forces had chosen to make their stand. The warlord stood at the command post, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the station through a hollow map projection. "These are not the actions of a defeated enemy," he said, his voice barely above a growl. I knew that tone well. It was the sound of his mind shifting from cold calculation to simmering frustration. The humans weren't retreating, as we had anticipated. They were preparing for something. The main thrust of our army had pressed within striking distance of the station. Scar Leader Fonzor's division, despite the setbacks during the advance, had recovered and was now positioning for the assault. His warriors, hardened veterans, moved in disciplined lines, each step methodical, measured. Behind them, the War Machine battalions rumbled forward, their hulking forms casting long shadows as the dying light of Wassala's sun painted the landscape in hues of red and gold. It should have been a glorious moment, but the tension was evident. "Why aren't they running?" I asked, more to myself than to the warlord. The enemy should have been scattering by now, overwhelmed by the sheer size of our forces. Yet the human forces within Angel Station remained unerringly silent. No last-minute evacuations, no desperate sallies. "They're not like the Bazagar," the warlord replied, his voice distant. "The humans are not a prey species. They don't scatter. They dig in." A cold realization settled over me as I glanced at the holomap again. Angel Station wasn't their last line of defense. It was a trap, a carefully laid one, and we were marching right into it. The warlord's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew he saw it too. But we were committed. We couldn't stop now, not with the entire army of Bunder Twilight poised for the final strike. The order came down. "Begin the assault," the warlord commanded. There was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of doubt, though I knew better. He was already adapting, already considering the possibility that this would be no ordinary siege. But to show hesitation now would be to weaken the resolve of the army. Fonzora's division surged forward, a tide of armored bodies sweeping toward the station. The first wave struck the outer perimeter, demolishing the flimsy defenses with ease. Sentries were torn apart by pulse fire, their feeble weapons no match for our shields. I watched from the command post as our warriors swarmed the outer structures, clearing them with brutal efficiency. It was quick, almost too quick. The second wave followed, led by Prandev's mechanized units. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the war machines as they advanced, their massive cannons aimed at the central compound of Angel Station. In minutes, the station's outer defenses were obliterated, and our forces closed in on the core. Victory seemed inevitable. But then it came, the first lesson. From beneath the station, hidden bunkers and artillery emplacements burst to life. The humans had waited, luring our forces into their trap. From every corner of the compound, hidden cannons erupted in a symphony of violence. Explosions rippled across our front lines, ripping through the vanguard. Warriors were flung like rag dolls, their armor shredded by high-velocity shrapnel. The war machines, so powerful, so feared, became targets for concentrated fire. In moments, 2 of them were destroyed, their hulking forms collapsing in flames. How? Fonzora's panicked voice crackled over the comm. Collected commander had been replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear. They're everywhere. The entire station is rigged. I looked to the warlord, expecting him to react with rage, but instead, he watched in silence. His eyes were locked on the battle, absorbing every detail, every mistake. He wasn't watching a defeat. He was learning. "Pull the war machines back," he ordered finally, his voice steady. "Concentrate infantry on the bunkers. Use the Zavathians to shield the advance." Zavathians, massive creatures of war, bred from the deepest jungles of our homeworld, thundered forward. They were slow, lumbering beasts, but their hides were nearly impervious to conventional weaponry. As the humans' artillery fire rained down, the Zavathians trudged forward, absorbing the blows that would have decimated our warriors. Fonzora regrouped, rallying his forces behind the beast as they pressed on, but the humans were relentless. From the inner walls of the station, their infantry emerged, small, fast, and dangerously precise. They moved in coordinated teams, exploiting the chaos to strike where our forces were vulnerable. In the narrow corridors and trenches surrounding the compound, the fighting became vicious hand-to-hand. Our warriors, used to overwhelming their enemies through brute force, found themselves outmaneuvered. The humans were fewer, but they were faster, more agile. Their smaller size gave them an advantage in the close quarters, darting beneath our strikes, planting explosives and retreating before we could respond. I saw the frustration on Fonzora's face as he transmitted his next report. "They're like ghosts. We can't pin them down." The warlord's expression hardened, then flushed them out. It was a brutal order, but necessary. Our forces brought out flame units, sweeping the trenches and bunkers with waves of fire. The humans fell back, their screams lost in the roar of battle. But they didn't break. For every trench cleared, another team of human soldiers appeared, striking from the shadows, dragging our warriors into a bloody stalemate. Hours passed, and the cost of every meter gained was steep. The warlord, watching from the command post, remained impassive. But beneath his calm exterior, I knew he was seething. We had won the ground, yes, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Angel Station was ours, but at a price we hadn't been prepared to pay. As night fell and the smoke from the battlefield hung heavy in the air, the warlord turned to me, his voice low. "Do you understand now?" he asked. I nodded, though the lesson burned. The humans had shown us what they were truly capable of. This would not be a swift, decisive war. It would be something far bloodier, and it was only the beginning. The skies above Wasilla churned with the weight of war, thick clouds stained with the smoke of battle stretching far beyond the horizon. Each day bled into the next, a relentless march of death and destruction. What should have been a quick campaign, a triumph of Bunder Twilight's might, had devolved into a bitter war of attrition. The humans, though smaller in number, had proven themselves more resilient than anyone, perhaps even the warlord, had anticipated. It had been weeks since the bloodbath at Angel Station, and the lessons learned there still echoed through every decision we made. We couldn't underestimate them again. But now, something even more dangerous was happening. They were adapting to us as well. I stood in the war room, the warlord seated at the head of the table, silent as usual. He had never been one for idle conversation, preferring the cold, calculating silence that let his mind churn through variables and outcomes. His dark eyes were fixed on the hollow map of the planet, his expression betraying nothing of the storm raging beneath. But I had been by his side long enough to feel it. They're not just holding us off anymore. I said, pointing to the strategic grid flickering in front of us. They're pushing back. It was true. Across Wassila's northern hemisphere, human forces were striking back in unexpected ways, hitting supply lines, targeting critical outposts, launching raids with deadly precision. It wasn't just defense anymore. It was offense. And worse, it was coordinated. They've changed their tactics, I continued. They're not holding to any pattern we can predict. Each strike comes from a different direction at a different time. They know we're trying to track them. The warlord's gaze didn't move from the map, but I saw his fingers tighten around the edge of the table. They've learned. The gravity of his words settled over the room like a lead weight. The human forces had begun the war reacting to our strength, surviving by playing defensively, but that phase had ended. Now, they were forcing us to react. A sharp, electronic chime echoed through the chamber, and General Singara strode in. His face, scarred from decades of battles, was a grim mask. He didn't wait for pleasantries. He knew better. "We've lost Fort Valus," he said, without preamble. "They overran the defenses 2 days ago. Reports came in this morning." The warlord's eyes flicked up. "How?" Sangara sighed, tapping a few keys on the terminal beside him. A series of images and schematics replaced the grid on the holomap, showing the fortress, a formidable structure designed to withstand siege weapons and infantry assaults alike, reduced to burning rubble. A coordinated strike on the east and north gates. They disabled our anti-air systems with sabotage teams. Once that was done, they bombarded the fort from the air, softened it up, then sent in ground forces to finish it. "Ground forces," the warlord echoed, leaning back in his chair. "They dared a direct confrontation?" "They didn't just dare," Sengar replied. "They won." The silence that followed was suffocating. The warlord's face betrayed no anger, no frustration, but the atmosphere in the room grew colder. "They've learned too much," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "This can't be allowed to continue." The warlord's fingers drummed against the arm of his chair, a rare, visible indication of his thought process. He was considering something more than just tactics. Then finally he stood, his towering form casting a long shadow over the room. "I've been too focused on breaking their bodies," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "But it's their minds that are winning this war." It was an unexpected admission. The warlord had always prided himself on his ability to conquer through overwhelming force, through sheer physical domination of his enemies. But the humans weren't playing by those rules anymore. "Mind games?" Sangara asked, raising an eyebrow. "You think that's how we win?" The warlord turned, his gaze falling on me. "Not games. Control." He walked toward the holomap, gesturing toward the grid that represented our operations across Wassila. "The humans are starting to feel confident. They've tasted victory, and now they think they can win. That confidence is their greatest weakness." "Confidence isn't a weakness," I said cautiously. "It's what makes them dangerous." He turned to me, eyes sharp. "Only if we let it grow unchecked. Confidence can be broken. We must make them doubt." I understood then. He wasn't planning another brute force assault. He wanted something more insidious. The humans had adapted to our tactics, but they hadn't yet faced the warlord's true strength. His ability to manipulate, to twist perception and reality, until the enemy didn't know what was real anymore. "You want to undermine them," I said, stepping closer to the map, "shatter their belief in their own strength." "Precisely." The warlord's eyes gleamed with dark intent. "We make them question everything. Their victories, their strategies, their very perception of the war. We sow chaos among their ranks. Not by force, but by feeding them illusions. We let them think they're winning, only to pull the rug out from under them when they least expect it." Sangara frowned. "You're talking about psychological warfare. Deception." The warlord smiled, a rare, cold expression that sent a shiver through the room. "Deception is a weapon like any other, one we've not yet wielded to its fullest." I felt a flicker of excitement stir within me. This was what the warlord excelled at, turning an enemy's strength against them. We had spent too long fighting the humans on their terms, and it had cost us. Now we would turn the tide. How do we begin? I asked. The warlord turned back to the holomap, his gaze locking onto a key sector of the planet's southern hemisphere, a cluster of mountains known as the Carix Peaks. We start here. Their high command has been using this area as a staging ground for their operations. It's remote, isolated. We've avoided it until now because the terrain makes a direct assault costly. Exactly, the warlord said, his voice taking on a calculated edge. But we're not going to attack. Not directly. I frowned, following his gaze. Then what? We let them think we've abandoned the region, he continued. Pull back our forces. Make it seem like we've decided the area isn't strategically valuable. Then we let them entrench themselves, grow comfortable. And when they're confident they're secure? I asked, already guessing his answer. We strike, the warlord said, his smile widening. But not with troops. With fear. With chaos. We disrupt their communications. Feed them false intelligence. Make them believe their own allies are turning against them. We make them paranoid, disoriented, until they collapse under the weight of their own mistrust. Sangara grunted, still skeptical. And if they don't, they will, the warlord said, his voice hard as iron, because they've never faced an enemy like us. We've been fighting them on their terms for too long. Now, we make them fight on ours. A dangerous energy buzzed through the room as the warlord's plan began to take shape. This wasn't just about winning a battle or even a campaign. This was about reshaping the war itself. The humans had thought they could fight us by adapting, by learning our strategies and countering them. But they hadn't reckoned with the true cunning of the warlord of Bunder Twilight. This was the turning point. Begin preparations immediately, the warlord commanded, his voice steady and unyielding. We'll remind the humans that no matter how clever they think they are, we control the battlefield. Always. As we left the war room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of something monumental. The humans had been tenacious, yes, but now the warlord had seen their weakness. And soon, the entire war would pivot on that revelation. The battle was no longer just for Wasilla. It was for their minds,